Amen. You may be seated. Okay, let's see. Who can tell me what today is? The Sabbath. Good. Okay. Today is the anniversary of the flood. This is the very day the flood rains fell. I mean, I love anniversaries. I don't know about you guys, but I love anniversaries. And here's something that happened like 3,500, 4,000, actually about 4,500 years ago. I mean, that is just incredible that here, 4,500 years later, we're still remembering. That is unbelievable. Well, in the Torah portion today starts in Genesis 18, but I want to start with Genesis 17 to show you some very interesting things. Now, how many of you have brought your Genesis book? This is what we're going through. We're in the book of Genesis. Okay. So here we go. Here we have in Genesis 17:21, God says, "But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this set time in the next year." What do you think the Hebrew word is for set time? Okay, I have it right here. La moed. And you can see la moed means set time. Now, here's what's important to know, and that means moed is translated as seasons in Genesis 1:14. God created for seasons. But we know that it actually means like a feast, a festival. But there is another Hebrew word for set time. Okay, and we're going to be looking at that. But I wanted you to know when it mentions the word moed, it's referring to a religious holiday. There's another word for set time that has nothing to do with the holiday, but it basically means, okay, this is the day we're going to get married, or this is the day we're going to meet up, all right? But whenever you see the word moed, it always refers to a holiday that is fixed, like Passover. You following me? Make sense? Okay, so everyone, get out your Genesis book. Here we go. And the Torah portion today is Vayera. Now, what does Vayera mean? And he appeared. It means to appear or to be seen. Do you remember the word Jehovah-Jireh? And what does that mean? The Lord will be seen. It's the same word, Yireh, and Va is and, Yerah. Okay, so if you look at this verse here, we have, and the Lord, and now that's in green. The reason it's in green, when Danny and I did this, we thought every letter should be capped, not just a capital L. And this is the way you know whenever it's the word Lord is in all caps, that's referring to the Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. Okay, and it says, he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. Now, why was he sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day? He's healing from circumcision. Okay, him and all his family have just been circumcised, and they're sitting in the heat of the day, which means it's like noon to 3. Okay, that's the heat of the day. And then it says, he lifted up his eyes, and lo, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and he bowed himself to the ground. Well, then what happens? Look at verse 3. It says, Vayomar, and he said, my what? Lords. Okay, you'll notice the word Lords is not all in caps. That's because it is not Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey this time. Okay, it is Adonai. I want you to notice every one of your English Bibles are wrong. If you go look at your King James Version, it says my Lord, singular. That is wrong. It is in the plural in Hebrew. So it is my Lord's. If now I found favor in your sight, pass not away, I beseech you, from your servant. And then he says, let a little water, I beseech you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Now the word you is plural. He's speaking to all three of them. You don't see that in English, but that's what he's doing. And then he says, I'll fetch a morsel of bread, and you comfort your hearts. After that, you can go on your merry way, seeing that you've come to your servant. And they said, okay, do as you said. So Abraham recognizes them, and he calls them his servant. And then what do we find here in verse 6? And Abraham hurried to the tent, okay, to Sarah. And he said, make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd. He fetched a young calf, tender and good. He gave it to a young man, and he hurried to prepare it. What do you see Abraham doing? He's running, and he's an old man. You know, how old is he here? He's like 99 years old. And he is full of energy. All right? He is running like crazy. And now, let's look what happens. In verse 8, he took butter and milk and the young calf which he had prepared, set it before them, and stood over them under the tree, and they ate. The word stood over them means they're sitting down under the tree, and he's like a waiter. He's standing over them, and he's wanting to help them. But notice, he serves them milk and meat at the same time. And I showed this to Orthodox Jews, and they said, yeah, but he waited a few hours before he gave them the milk. And I said, what happened to that milk in the heat of the day after 4 hours, I don't think so. And it says he set them together. Okay, now look at this. It says, and they said to him, all 3 of them at the same time, not one of them. All 3 of them at the same time are saying, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, behold, in the tent. Okay. So here we have 3 people speaking as one. Isn't that fascinating? So let's go to verse 10. And now this is one person speaking now. This isn't all 3. This is one of those 3. He said, I will certainly return to you at this, what? Appointed time. See, your notes aren't in the Mark Biltz Bible. They're just what I just happened to post. But up here on the screen is what I'm reading from. And he says, I'll return to you at this what? Appointed time. And you'll notice this time it's not moed. It's ba'et. Ba'et. Okay? That also means a set time, not necessarily a festival, even though in this particular case it is both. It is both a festival and it is a time that is fixed when this is going to happen. And then it says, Sarah, your wife, is going to have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door, which was behind him. And so what do we find happens? Therefore, Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I am old, how old is Sarah? 89. 89. After I'm grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? If I was Abraham, I'd say, speak for yourself. Okay. And now look at verse 13. Vayomer, and the Lord, this is all caps. And the reason Lord is all caps, it's the Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. So this is really important when you're looking at the Hebrew. And this is why in the Mark Biltz Bible in Genesis, We always know when it's the Yud Hey Vav Hey because it is all caps. Otherwise, it could be Adonai or something else. And the Lord says to who? Abraham. Why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Okay, well, Abraham laughed. No, hey, you don't mind that Abraham laughing and not believing it, but now Sarah's laughing. Well, how only God would know that she laughed within herself. This is how you know this is God, because he sees what's going on the inside. It says she laughed within herself. Well, let's look at Genesis 18:14. It says, is anything too hard for the Yud Hey Vav Hey? And then again it says, at the set time, I'm going to return to you, when the season comes around, and Sarah shall have a son. Well, where did we learn to laugh from? Where did we get laughter from? That's the word. But God laughs. We're created in God's image. And we are able to laugh because God has the biggest belly laughs in the world. You know, this is the problem I have with Orthodox Jews sometimes, because they always say all of these things of God are just a personification. He doesn't really have them, only we do. And I'm saying that's impossible. You're telling me God has no emotions? He's like a celestial AI computer? I don't think so. We couldn't have our emotions if our emotions didn't come from him. And so God, I mean, when you think of the funniest laugh you've ever heard, that's God. And take it times about 1,000. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you how much God laughs. Look at Psalm 2:2-4. The kings of the earth set themselves. The rulers take counsel. Sounds like the UN. Against the Lord and against his anointed, which also is like the Mashiach, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. And then it says the Lord sits in the heavens. He's going to have a belly laugh. The Lord's going to put them in derision. Look at Psalm 37, verse 12 and 13. The wicked are plotting against the just and gnashing upon them with their teeth. And the Lord is going to laugh and laugh, for he see his days coming. And look at Job 5:22 and 23. At destruction and famine, he says you're going to laugh. What? Neither will you be afraid of the beasts of the earth, for you'll be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field will be at peace with you. You ever think about that for a minute? Wow. You know, when all kinds of horrible things happen, destruction going on, famines going on, we're going to laugh. We're not going to be afraid. You think of this. If there's a famine, the beasts are hungry. And if a lion is hungry, he's going to be looking for food. Right? But it says you're not going to be afraid of even the animals that are looking for food. They're not going to eat you. It says you're going to be in league with the stones. Nobody's even going to know. They're going to pass right over you. Now, that means a lot in Israel because there's nothing but rocks. Okay? And it says the beasts of the field are going to be at peace with you. You don't have to worry about it. You know, if for some reason you're on the run because destruction's going on and famine's going on, you're going to laugh at everything because you know it's all cool. This is why I don't have any fear. I just do not fear anything. So many Christians are so concerned about the tribulation, they want to rapture, get me out of here, they're afraid. That's not me. This is the Super Bowl of human history. Put me in the game, coach. Hey, we're all going to die anyway. I want to go down swinging. You know, retirement is not in my mind. I see me as speeding up, believe it or not. As I get older, I see it as I'm going to go faster and faster. There is no slowing down. Hope y'all can keep up with me. Okay, so basically, we have a laughing place. How many of you ever heard of the laughing place? Heaven is God's laughing place. But I want to show you something that'll make you laugh. Here is an interview between President Trump and Netanyahu. And President Trump is trying to show how he's smarter than everyone else. He knows that Abraham is not the real pronunciation. So he's going to do an attempt at pronouncing it the correct way. Okay, here we go.
Negotiating the Abraham Accords. I like to say it that way because the real people, that's what they call Abraham. I would say Abraham, but it's so much nicer when you say Abraham. So much more elegant.
I've got to contribute my own. We can re-energize the Abraham Accords. That's what it's called in the original Hebrew. Abraham. Abraham is fine. Abraham, however you want to call it.
Back to our laughing place. But this is why in the Mark Bible we have the V there. The letter bait can be a B sound or a V sound. The difference is if there's a little ball in the letter. If the ball is in the letter, it's the B. If there's no little ball in the middle, it's the V. So it's the Abraham, not Abraham. Okay, moving on. I just thought that was hilarious. Okay. Let me see. That is 10. All right. Let me just see something. So, what do we see here in verse 14, Genesis 18:14? It says, that's the verse right before Psalms 2. I put it in the wrong order. It says, is anything too hard for the Lord? And then it says, at the appointed time, I will return to you and Sarah will have a son. And what's the Hebrew word for an appointed time this time? La moed. Okay, do we see that? Well, guess what? That is Passover. Isaac was born on Passover. That's what is so important for us to understand. Okay. Let's see. Now, look at this. This is Genesis 18, verse 20. And the Lord, now this is the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, notice what does it say? Does it say we or I? I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry which has come to me, and if not, I will know. So who is going to go down? The Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is going to go down. Does everyone see that? Well, look at verse 22. And the men, this is the other two people that were with him, turned their faces from there, and they went down toward Sodom. But Abraham stood still before the... Well, now, wait a minute. Wait a minute. What's happening? Okay. Well, guess what? The three are the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit as one. They all came as individuals. Yeah. Now watch how this unfolds. And Abraham is talking to the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh up on the hill. And he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry. I will speak yet but this once. Possibly, and he's going down from 50, 40, 30, 20, he's down to 10, shall be found there. And he said, okay, I won't destroy it for 10's sake. Now, how many of you have ever heard of a minyan? A minyan is 10 people. Typically, at a service, the Jews want at least 10 people to form a minyan. And they got it from this verse. Okay? In other words, 10 is the minimum you can have to appeal before the Lord. That's where they got this from. And then it says, and the Lord went his way as soon as he had left talking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Okay, so now look at this. Here we go. And there came two messengers. Some Bibles say angels. We like to just say messengers and capital M because it's two members of the Godhead. To Sodom at evening, Lot is sitting in the gate of Sodom. What does that mean? He's in authority. Those in authority sit at the gates of every place. Lot is in authority. Okay, and Lot saw them. He rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face to the ground. And he said, behold now, my lords, plural, turn in, I beseech you, to your servant's house, and remain all night. Wash your feet. You shall rise up early and get the heck out of here. And they said, nope, we're going to stay in the street all night. Oops. And then it says in verse 3, he pressed upon them greatly. And so they turned into him, entered into his house. He made them a what? Of unleavened bread. This is Passover. This is another hint that this is happening at Passover. And it says, before they could even lay down to sleep, the men of the city, the men of Sodom surrounded the house, both the old men and the young men, all the people from every quarter. What is going on here? Okay. Lot goes out and he spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters, and he said, arise, get out from this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But to his sons-in-law, it seemed that he was joking. This is the problem with Lot. Lot represents the church that is righteous but has been totally assimilated. And here, you're not going to believe someone that something grievous is going to happen if they come across like they're joking. So Lot wasn't being serious. It's just like if someone goes up, and yells, fire in the theater and everybody panics. But if they go up and go, hey, there's a fire, no one's going to believe them. Here, Lot, the seriousness of the entire city is being destroyed, and he goes to his own relatives to tell them, but they think he's kidding. The blame on this goes on Lot. At dawn, the messengers tried to make Lot hurry. They were there all night. Lot was dilly-dallying, sleeping, taking his time, saying, arise, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you will be swept away in the iniquity of this city. Wow, this is huge. Okay? Now, one thing that was interesting, do you know what the iniquity of that city was? What do you think was the iniquity of the city of Sodom? The number one problem was cruelty to strangers. Homosexuality was not the big thing. It was part of it. It's like the dandelion, but not the root. The root of their problem was pride, arrogance, fat and lazy, cruelty to strangers. They did not want anyone coming into their city. No outsiders allowed. That was their attitude. And I'm going to prove it biblically. You know why? Nobody cares what I have to say. They want to know what God has to say. So I just love quoting God. Go to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 16, and look at verse 49 and 50. This was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. The number one reason is what? Pride. Fat and lazy. Abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters, neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. They were haughty. They committed abomination before me. That's why I took them away as I saw good. Right there, it tells you. The root of their problem was pride. That's the biggest problem. They think they're better than everyone else, and therefore they're cruel to everyone else. But isn't that fascinating verse? Now, how many are in Lot's family? How many are in Lot's family? There's 8. Because he had 4 daughters, 2 were married. He had 2 were married. And he went out to his sons-in-laws. Then he had 2 in the house. And then they had him and his wife. So him and his wife and 2 daughters are 4. The other 4 are his 2 daughters and 2 sons-in-laws. The reason why Abraham stopped at 10, he figured, I've got those 8 for sure. All I need is 2 more. And that would make the 10. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so now, as we go to verse 24. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. My goodness, good Lord, they're in 2 places. One's on earth and one's in heaven. Isn't that fascinating how that works? Now, in verse 26, it says, Lot's wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Now, does anyone know why she became a pillar of salt? Why not a pillar of mud? Why not a pillar of bricks? I will tell you the story for the rest of the news. Okay, first off, why did she look back? She wasn't supposed to look back, but why did she look back? She was hoping her other 2 daughters and sons-in-laws were coming. Okay, she had familial ties she wanted to see. That's what one person says. But another person said it's because she actually really wanted to die along with her other 2 daughters. Yeah, I mean, they're going to die. She already knows they're going to die. And she decides rather than taking off with Lot, she wants to die with her other 2 daughters. And that's why she looked back. We don't know. I'm just giving you possibilities. Now, another thought was, it was measure for measure. God always does things measure for measure. It is said that when the messengers came to the house, she had the same heart as the rest of those in Sodom, and she didn't like these 2 guys coming in eating her food. And so she went around telling everybody about these 2 guys in the house, and that's how they knew they were there. But the way she did it, she went around to all the neighbors asking for salt to feed these extra intruders, okay, as there was the law not to allow travelers into your house. There was a law. You cannot allow travelers into your house. So what does she do? She goes around and she asks salt for everybody because she has these intruders in the house. So because she asked for salt, God turned her into salt. Isn't that amazing? It's just amazing. Okay, so now we're going to go to Genesis 20, and this is verses 10 through 12. The story moves on. Abraham ends up going to Gerar, which is over by the Gaza Strip. He was in Hebron. He goes to the other side of Israel, and he encounters Avimelech, not Abimelech. Avimelech said to Abraham, "What did you see that you have done this thing?" And what did he do? What had Abraham done? He had let Abimelech take Sarah, his wife. He said she was my sister because he's more concerned about himself than he is his wife. But she was his sister. Look what it says. It says, and Abraham said, because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they're going to slay me for my wife's sake. And yet she indeed is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. Now, this is very, very important because in Orthodox Judaism, they think Sarah was Lot's daughter, Iscah. No, right here it says Terah's daughter. That's why she's a half-sister to Abraham. Okay. So now let's look at verse 17 and 18. And Abraham prayed to God and healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bore children. It says the Lord had fast closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Do you know what's amazing about that? As soon as Abraham prayed for the Lord to open up the wombs of the pagans, God opened the womb of Sarah. If you want something in life, you pray for someone else to get it first. Look at that concept. If you really want funds, pray that someone else receives funds. I mean, this is why I believe it's in Corinthians. It says, seek another man's wealth. That's what it says. And I know, personally speaking, for myself, I always had the attitude growing up, in every business I was at, I was not trying to succeed. I tried to make my boss look good and make him succeed. And every time he moved up, guess who came along with him? That's how it works. It really does. So for me, that's why I love blessing people. That's why I want to seek other people's enjoyment, happiness. And then I get suffocated with happiness and joy. But it's as we seek other people's joy. Oh, I'm serious. Tells us this is how it works. Well, let's jump over to Genesis 21:14. Now, Sarah has given birth to Isaac. And how old is Ishmael? 13 years old. And he's making fun of little Isaac. And so Sarah says, Hagar is out of here. Now, do you remember what Hagar name means? Ger, stranger. So that's her name, the stranger. Well, Sarah's upset. Now, look at this. It says, and Abraham rose up early in the morning. You know how he always gets up early in the morning? I think that's another interesting thing to do especially if it's something you hate to. If you absolutely hated to have to do something the following day, are you going to sleep in or get up early? You're going to want to sleep in. I don't want to do it. But when it comes to sacrificing Isaac, he got up early. When it comes to getting rid of Hagar, he got up early. He didn't really want to do these things. But it says, look at this, he took a loaf of rainbow bread, just kidding, a bottle of water, and gave it to Hagar, put it on her shoulder, and the child, sent her away, and she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, you know what's fascinating about this? Genesis 13, in Genesis 13, it mentions how Abram was very rich in cattle, silver, and gold when he left Egypt. In Genesis 14, he has 318 trained servants in his household that pursues everyone to Dan. Okay, why not give Hagar some silver and gold along with some livestock, as well as be accompanied with some trained servants for protection? I mean, if he's got thousands of sheep, a bunch of camels, why not give her a donkey to ride on, for heaven's sake? Why not give her a donkey to carry a whole bunch of supplies? He's rich, filthy rich. And all he gives her is a loaf of bread and a bottle of water. Did he want her to die? That's a question. What did you say, Jeff? He wanted peace in his house. Yeah, if he had really loaded her up, maybe Sarah would have got really mad. So I just don't know if you ever thought about this kind of stuff. So I just want to make you guys just, really ponder the scriptures when you read it. Okay, now, there are two different answers why he did that in the commentaries. One of them is that God had promised Hagar would be cared for. God told Abraham he's going to care for her and that he would become a nation. God had given him that promise, that they would be under his protection. Okay, so that's pretty incredible. But now I want to show you this verse, or we're going to start with this. Okay, can anybody? This is the Vav, U-M-R, Vayomer. Say Vayomer. And what does that mean? And he said, we've been going through that over and over all this morning. Vayomer, and he said, and then you have, they both make the same sound. It's kak, which is take. Now, here's the thing I want you to notice. This is a word that is almost never translated in the Bible, which really affects your theology in one sense. This we're about to read is where God tells Abraham to take his only son Isaac and offer him up. Okay? And this is God speaking, and he said, take, but look at this, please. Did you know God, when he tells Abraham, it wasn't a command? Is that, hey, would you please do this? Right here. Here is the word na, and we added it in the Mark Bill's Bible in Genesis because it's not in any English, but God is actually saying, would you please do this? It wasn't a command that he had to do. That is amazing to me. Okay, and I think it's fascinating. They say there's kind of pauses in this conversation when God says, please take your son. Abraham goes, well, I got two sons. And he goes, your only son, Isaac. And he goes, well, what? He says, the one whom you love. Now, here is something that is going to blow your mind. You ready to have your mind blown? Was he his only son? Yes, he was. Ishmael was born to Avram. Isaac was born to Avraham after his name was changed. Did you catch that? Ishmael was the son of Avram, but now Avram's become a new creation. He's Avraham, and Isaac is his only son. Is that a wow? Yeah, this is why you have to detail your Bible. You may think there's errors. No, there's not errors. God is trying to tell us something. Isn't this fun? Now, the pictures are all wrong. How old was Isaac when Avraham was going to offer him up? 26? Okay, here we go. 37, and Abraham was 137. Now, think about this for a minute. Do you think Isaac could run faster than his father Abraham? He could have easily gotten away, which tells us that Isaac was willing to go through with this. Now, why was Isaac willing to go through with this, and why was Abraham willing to go through with this? Okay. It all comes down, you cannot go by your emotions. You cannot go by what you think. Everything has to be by the word of God. God told Abraham every seed was going to come through Isaac. So he's thinking, okay, God, if you say all my offspring is coming from Isaac and you want me to kill him, you're going to raise him from the dead. So he said, I believe you have the power to raise me from the dead. And Isaac goes, well, I believe you have the power to raise me from the dead. So that wasn't the problem. But isn't that fascinating when you understand it was a please, not a must. And God said, your entire seed that are going to be as the stars of heaven are all coming through Isaac. Oh, okay, God. I definitely want to make sure it's him. But that is amazing to me. So look at this. It says in verse 6, Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering. He laid it upon Isaac, his son. He took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. In other words, they are unified in this task. And now Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, hey, Dad. And Dad says, here I am, my son. And he said, hey, we got the fire, we got the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? All of a sudden, a possible conflict here. Isaac hadn't cut it yet. And it says, and Abraham said, my son, God will, all your English Bibles are wrong. It says provide himself a lamb. It's not provide. It's to show himself as a lamb. The Lord is going to show himself a lamb for a burnt offering. And it says, so both of them went together. Now I have verse 14 there because watch what happens in verse 14. But again, this means they were unified initially, but after Isaac found out he's possibly going to be the offering, they still are unified. Now, look at this. Then we find, after the whole events unfolded, in verse 14, and Abraham called the name of that place Adonai, what? And what is our Torah portion? Vayera. And he appeared. Who appeared? The Lord appeared. And it says here, as it is said, well, it says Adonai Yireh, which means God will show himself. God will show himself. As it is said to this day in the mount, the Lord shall be seen. The Lord himself showed himself as the ram or the lamb. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven the second time and said, now this angel is God, and by myself have I sworn, says the Lord, because you've done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Wow, this is absolutely amazing to me. Let me go on here. It says, in blessing I will bless you. In multiplying I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed will possess the gate of his enemies. And in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Now, that's not what we have in the Mark Biltz Bible. We have, if you'll notice right here, it has that in blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I'll multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven, as the sand which is upon the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And then it says, and in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed me. Okay, it's more than my voice, it's me. Okay, so that's how we have correctly translated that. But wait, there's more. Look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 17 through 19. It says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. He that had received the promise offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall your seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead. So there you go. There's the verse that tells you Abraham had the faith to believe God would raise him up from the dead. So now, look at this last verse here. Genesis 22:19. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. Okay, now what's amazing about that? They lived in Beersheba. He goes all the way up to Jerusalem. He goes all the way back to Beersheba, but not with Isaac. He only went back with his two young men. Who were the two young men, do you think? Eliezer and Ishmael. Okay, so he goes back with Eliezer and Ishmael. Where does Isaac go? I mean, Isaac just got almost killed. His, was kind of mind blown himself. He ends up going probably to see his mother. Now, his mom's in Beersheba, okay, because that's where they lived. When Abraham comes back to Beersheba, she's gone. Where did she go? She went over to Hebron. She went back over to Hebron. Isaac goes down to see her in Hebron. He probably stops in Jerusalem and talks to Melchizedek. Well, guess what? Sarah couldn't handle the pressure of Isaac being offered up, and it killed her. So next week is Chai Sarah, the life of Sarah. That's the Torah portion. Abraham goes to Beersheba. Sarah's gone. So what does he do? He goes over to Hebron to see how she's doing and find out she's dead. So that's next week. With that said, let's stand. Abinu Mokeinu, our Father King, we just thank you so much that we can come and share your mind-blowing word. Your word is so amazing. God, we love detailing it, looking at the minute details like snow under a microscope. And we can't help but know you exist, you are true, you are faithful, your word is truly forever. And we just want everyone to fall in love with you. Father, I just thank you so much for all of those around the world who want to participate in glorifying you. Even as you said in your word, you want to magnify the Torah and make it honorable. I so appreciate everyone that's here locally, around the United States, around the world, whose goal is not to magnify an organization, it's not to magnify a person, it's to magnify you. And we just thank you for all those who want to participate with us in giving you all the glory and magnifying your Torah so people can see what a good, good God you are. In Yeshua's name, amen. Together, blessed are you, Lord our God, creator and king of the universe. You have blessed us with your Torah of truth. You have blessed us with the whole counsel of your living word by the power of your Holy Spirit. Through the completed work of Messiah Yeshua, you alone have blessed among us life eternal. Blessed are you, Lord our God. Amen. Take a break. Okay, so here we are. 2 Samuel. And we're going to start with chapter 2. Now, if you remember, last week, after the death of Saul, remember Saul was killed? And there was an Amalekite who pretended that he's the one who killed him when he really didn't. And so David killed him. Do you remember that? Okay, after Saul died, who became king? Who became king after Saul? Well, this is where, again, you have to detail. David was king over Judah. Who was king over Israel? Yes, Saul's son Ishbosheth. So he became king of Israel. How long was he king of Israel? 2 years. Okay, and then the kingdom was united. So I'm just trying to clarify some things. And so what happens during those 2 years? You have civil war in Israel between the house of Saul and the house of David. 2 kings, civil war going on. Okay, now, we're going to start with 2 Samuel 2, 1 and 2. It says, it came to pass after this that David goes, he inquires of the Lord, and he says, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. And David said, okay, where am I supposed to go? And he said, go to Hebron. So David went up there, and he has 2 wives at this time, Ahinoam and Abigail, Nabal's wife, the Carmelite. Now look at verse 3 and 4. It says, his men that were with him, David brought up, every man with his entire family, and they all dwelt in the cities of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, hey, the men of Jabesh Gilead, they were the ones who were kind enough to bury Saul. And so David, wants to bless them. And so in verse 5 and 6, David sends messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead, and he said to them, blessed are you of the Lord, that you showed this kindness to your Lord, even to Saul, and you buried him. And then it says, and now the Lord show kindness and truth to you. And also, I will requite you this kindness. In other words, I'm going to reward you for this kindness because you've done this. And then look what he says in verse 7. Therefore now let your hands be strengthened, be valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. So in other words, he's trying to get people under the house of Israel to come under the house of Judah, right? Politically, this is pretty smart. But look what happens. It says, but Abner, who was Abner? He was the captain of the host, but he is also Saul's uncle. Okay, so Abner is Saul's uncle. He's the captain of the army, and he's the one who took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and he made him king over Gilead, the Asherites, Jezreel, Ephraim, Benjamin, and over all of Israel. All right, and we see Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 2 years. Okay, quiz time. What was Saul's dad's name? Saul was known as the son of Kish. That's exactly right. Well, it says, but Abner, the son of who? Ner. Kish and Ner are brothers. Okay. Now, where it says his name is Abner, the son of Ner. Do you see Ner in Abner? What does Ner mean in Hebrew? Candle. So Avner is the son of the candle. Okay, or son of light, however you want to say it. Okay, and then we see in 2 Samuel 2, verse 10 through 13, it says, the house of Judah followed David. And it says here that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah for 7 years and 6 months. At that time, he gets the whole kingdom, and he goes to Jerusalem. He moves the ark to Jerusalem. But he is king in Hebron for 7 years and 6 months. And Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab. Now, who is Joab? Joab is the captain of the host for David's army. Okay? So that's David's army captain. He was the son of Zuriah, the servant of David. He went out, and look at this, met together by the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, the one on the one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. Okay, so I don't know if you're imagining this. There's a pool. And on one side is Abner, okay, and all of Israel. On the other side of the pool is Joab and all of Judah, and they're doing a stare down across the lake. And one of them has the idea, and he says, hey, let's have fun. Let's play together? And so they take some of that team and some of this team, and they're going to go fight. Okay, so they're having fun. Okay, let's see who's stronger. So they're eyeing each other across the pool, having small talk, who's going to beat up who's stronger. And they say, well, let's have a little contest. Let's have some UFC going on here. And so they get these guys together. And look at what it says. Abner, the captain of the host for Saul's side, says to Joab, the captain of the host of Judah's side, hey, let these young men now arise and play or fight. And Joab said, fine, let's go. Then there arose and went over by number 12 of Benjamin's side, which pertained to Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. So they may have hundreds of people on each side, but 12 of each go. And look at what happens. At the same time, they all caught everyone his fellow by the head, thrust his sword in his fellow's side, and they all fell down, all 24 of them. They all grabbed each other's by the beard and took their knife and stabbed him. Well, the other guy grabbed his beard and stabbed him, and so they all died together at the same time. Yeah. And so in verse 16 and 17, of course, they caught everyone his fellow by the head, thrust his sword in his fellow's side. They fell down together, wherefore the place was called, what the heck? No. Helkath-Zerim. And what that means in English is the scourge of the narrow-minded, which is in Gibeon. And there was a very sore battle that day, and Abner, Saul's side, was getting whipped, and the men of Israel fled before the servants of David. I can just see this happening. But now look at this. These are three names you want to remember. In 2 Samuel 18 and 19, these were the three sons of Zeruiah. There was Joab. Joab is the captain of the army. Abishai and Asahel. But Asahel was like an Olympic champion runner. It says he was light of foot as a wild roe. So what is he doing after this battle? Abner, the captain of the host, and all of Israel's fleeing before Judah, right? Well, he's so fast, he decides he was going to pursue after Abner. And then he didn't turn to the right or left from following Abner. In other words, you can see, Saul's group running, fleeing. And here's this young kid, and he's going after the captain, Abner. And he's just running after him. Of course, everybody's scattered. And Abner turns around and he sees him coming after him. And it says this, Abner, he looked back and he said, is that you, Asahel? And he said, it is I. And Abner said, then get out of here. Go to the right, go to the left, put your hands on one of the fighting men and go after them. Quit chasing me. But Asahel would not be turned away from going after Abner. Then again, Abner said to Asahel, go to one side, don't keep on coming after me. Why will you make me kill you? For then I will be ashamed before your brother Joab. Okay, they have somewhat of a relationship. It's kind of like the Civil War, brother against brother. But look at 2 Samuel 2, verse 23. He still did not go to one side or the other. Abner gave him a back blow in the stomach with his spear, so the spear came out of his back. And he went down on the earth, wounded to death, and all those who came to the place where Asahel went down dead came to a stop. So here he's running, he's got his spear, and he just goes like that and pokes it right through his stomach. The spear's pointing toward him. While he's running, he just goes and goes right through his stomach, out his back. He lays down dead. And now everyone else who's following after this real quick runner, trying to get Abner too, they all see him and they just stop. And they're looking at him, and he is dead. And then they try to finally get everything to stop. And it says, and Joab came back from fighting Abner, and when he had got all of his men together, it was seen that only 19 of David's men, in addition to Asahel, were not with him. In other words, look at this. Saul's side got wiped out, but David's side only lost about 19 soldiers. And then it says in chapter 3, verse 1, there was a long war between Saul's people and David's people. Okay? And David became stronger and stronger, but those on Saul's side became more and more feeble. So how long was David in Hebron? 7.5 years. What's going on in Hebron? It says in 2 Samuel 3, 2 through 5, David was in Hebron and he became a dad. The oldest was Amnon, the son of Ahinoam of Jezreel. The second one was Chileab, whose mother was Abigail, the one we know, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And the third was Absalom, the son of Maacah, who was the daughter of Talmai, the king of Geshur. And the fourth was Adonijah, the son of Haggith. The fifth was Saphatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithream, whose mother was David's wife, Eglah. Okay, so in other words, David is in Hebron, and he has 6 kids and 6 wives. All right, he has 6 wives. Each wife has 1 kid, and this is the order of birth. So who is supposed to be king after David? Amnon. And then after him would be Chileab, and then Absalom, and then Adonijah. This is the birth order according to the Torah, who's supposed to be king. But after 7.5 years, he moves to Jerusalem. He acquires more wives and more kids. So these are David's kids from the wives he had in Jerusalem. Now look where Solomon is. Solomon isn't supposed to be king. Now, let's watch how this unfolds. That's Solomon's mother. These are the names of the kids. So Bathsheba is the mother. These are all different mothers. These are the kids, not the mother's names. These are the kids' names. Okay, so let's watch what happens now as this unfolds. In 2 Samuel 3, 7 through 8, Saul had among his wives a woman named Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. And look what Ishbosheth is who? Ishbosheth is who? He's the king. He's Saul's son that Abner made king. So Abner makes Ishbosheth the king. He's the captain of the army. But look what Ishbosheth, the king, says to the commander of his army. Why did you take my father's wife, who's now dead? Saul's dead. And he says, why did you take my father's wife? And now Abner was very angry at the words of Ishbosheth. And he said, am I a dog's head of Judah? I am this day doing everything in my power because of your father Saul and for his brother and his friends, and I've not given you up into the hands of David. And now you're telling me I've done something wrong by being with Saul's former wife because he's dead? It's not smart for a king to get the commander of his army mad at him. Okay. So let's go to verse 12 and 13. What does Abner do? Because Abner's so upset because the king was upset what he did, Abner sent men to David in Hebron. And he says, hey, make an agreement with me, and I'll give you my support in getting all of Israel on your side. Wow. Look at that. He's about to turn the whole army over to David. And he said, it is well. I'll make an agreement with you. But on one condition, which is that when you come to see me, David says, you better bring Saul's daughter, Michal, is to come with you. Until she comes, you will not see my face. Because that was David's wife. And then, after the problem with Saul, he gave her to someone else. Okay, so David's mad. And so look what happens. This is kind of a fascinating story. In 2 Samuel 3, 20 and 21, so Abner with 20 men came to Hebron to David, and David made a feast for Abner. This is the captain of the army that's trying to overthrow him. And he makes a feast with him and the men who were with him. And Abner said that David, okay, Now I'm going to go and I'm going to make all of Israel come to you, my lord, the king, so that they may make an agreement with you and your kingdom may be as wide as your heart's desire. Then David sent Abner away and he went in peace. Okay. Now let's think about this. Abner is the general of the army. He got mad at Saul's son, and so he's going to turn everything over to King David. But who did Abner just kill with the spear? The fast guy, who is the younger brother of his captain, Joab. So even though David just made an agreement with Abner for peace, Joab comes and he's all upset at David because he made peace and that mean guy killed my brother. So let's watch how this unfolds. 2 Samuel 3, 22-24. The servants of David and Joab, they had been out attacking a band of armed men, and they came back with a great store of goods taken in the fight. But Abner had left, for he had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. Now when Joab and his men came, news was given them that Abner, the son of Ner, had come to the king, who had let him go away again in peace. Then Joab came to the king and said, "What in the world have you done? When Abner came to you, why didn't you send him away? Why did you send him away and let him go?" And so look what happens in verse 26 and 27. When Joab left David, he sent men to go after Abner, and they overtook him at the water spring of Sirah and made him come back with them. But David had no knowledge. And then when Abner was back in Hebron, Joab took him on one side of the doorway of the town to have a word with him quietly, and there he gave him a wound in the stomach, causing his death in payment for the death of his brother. He wounds him in the stomach, just like Abner killed his brother in the stomach. You're going to see a payback in the future because David is very mad at the captain of his army for killing an innocent man. I won't tell you what happens, but we'll get there. I'll tell you eventually. Okay. Now look what David says in verse 28 and 29. When David had heard word of it, he said, "May I and my kingdom be clear forever in the eyes of the Lord from the blood of Abner, the son of Ner. But may it all come on the head of Joab and all of his father's family. Among the men of Joab's family, may there ever be people who are diseased or lepers." Wow, David's praying that there will always be someone with leprosy in his family or some kind of a disease, or may they do the work of women, or may they be all killed by the sword, or are wasted from need of food. David really put the curse on the commander of his host. And so, therefore, it became clear to all of Israel and to all the people on that day that the king was not responsible for the death of Abner, the son of Ner. And the king said to his servants, "Do you not see that a chief and a great man has come to his end today in Israel? And I am this day weak, even though I'm anointed king. And these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are just too difficult for me. The Lord is going to reward these doers of evil according to their wickedness." He just wanted to make sure with all of his troops, even though this was the enemy per se, you just don't do that. But now look what happens. Now, in 2 Samuel 4, 1 and 2, Saul's son Ishbosheth heard that the commander of his army was dead in Hebron. So his hands are feeble, and all the people under him are troubled. And so Saul's son, look at this. Okay, the captain of his army, Abner, is now dead, who was really mad at him, so he probably feels a little safer. But it says that Ishbosheth had two other men who were the captains of his armies. And these two captains, the name of one of them was Bana, and the other was Rechab. And look at this in verse 7 and 8. When these two captains under Ishbosheth came into his house. He was stretched out on his bed sleeping. And they made an attack on him and killed him. And they cut off his head. And then they took it with them and went by the road through the Arava all night. We were in the Arava in Israel. And then they took the head of Ishbosheth to David in Hebron and said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, who hated you, who would have taken your life. And the Lord has taken payment for the wrongs of my lord, the king, from Saul and his seed today." So what do we see? Do you remember what happened to the Amalekite who was trying to get a reward for killing Saul and brought the crown, and he never did it? Well, here are two guys that are wanting a reward for the head of Ishbosheth. And what do you think David's going to do for their reward? Off with their heads. Because that's who David is. Okay. And so when one came to me with the news of Saul's death in the belief that it would be good news, I took him and put him to death in Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more, when evil men have put an upright person to death in his house, sleeping on his bed, will I take payment from you for his blood and have you cut off from the earth? So David gave orders to his young men, and they put them to death, cutting off their hands and their feet, and they hung them up by the side of a pool in Hebron. Don't know if I want to go swimming there. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and put it in his last resting place with Abner's body in Hebron. Wow. You can see what's happening to Saul's family, David's family. Now, remember, Jonathan and David were very close. They loved each other. Well, Jonathan has a son, and he was lame in his feet. What had happened when he was only 5 years old, the news that Saul had died, Jonathan came from Jezreel, and there was a woman who was taking care of him, went up in flight, and while she was getting away as quickly as she could, he had a fall and his feet were damaged, and his name was Mephibosheth. Okay, well, we know that David loved Jonathan. You know he's going to love Mephibosheth, who's lame in his feet from birth, and he was only 5 years old when Saul died. He's a little kid. So David decides to bring him to the king's house, and he gets to stay with the king and eat with the king and live with the king. Okay, it says, King David made an agreement with those in Hebron before the Lord, and they put holy oil on David, made him king over now, not just Judah, but over all of Israel. David was only 30 years old when he became king. And he was king for 40 years, ruling over Judah in Hebron for 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem over all of Israel and Judah for 33 years. So he's like 40 years and 6 months. Okay. Then it says in 2 Samuel 5:14 and 16, these are the names of those whose birth took place in Jerusalem. And it mentions everyone else I have on the screen there. Okay, so now it's mentioning all of those kids. Now, how many wives does David have? A bunch. How many kids does he have? A bunch. Okay, so let's look at verse 17 and 18. And when the Philistines had news that David is now king over all of Israel, they all went up in search of David. And David, who heard of it, he went down to a strong place. And the Philistines came. And then they went in every direction in the valley of Rephaim. And so now David needs direction. And in 2 Samuel 5:19, David, he wants directions from the Lord. See, that's what's so important for leaders. You don't go to the witch of Endor. You go to the Lord. And he asked the Lord, okay, am I supposed to go up against the Philistines? Are you going to give them up into my hands? I think that's interesting that he details these questions. Can I go up against the Philistines? God says, sure. Oh, but wait a minute. Am I going to win? Okay. And the Lord said, yeah, go get them, for I will certainly give up the Philistines into your hands. And then again, David has to get directions again. It's not just a one-time thing. So in verse 23 through 25, David goes for the directions to the Lord. And You are not to go up against them in the front, God says, but make a circle around them from the back and come on them opposite the spice trees. Then when you hear the sound of footsteps in the tops of the trees, go quickly, for the Lord has gone out before you to overcome the army of the Philistines. And David did as the Lord had said, and he overcame the Philistines, attacking them from Gibeon to near Gezer. Isn't that interesting? God's army, he could hear the army of the chariots going through the top of the mulberry trees, these invisible army and chariots. This is incredible. So what happens? Look, the Ark of the Covenant is in Kiryat Yearim, and they're going to try to bring it up to Jerusalem. And it says they put the Ark of God on a brand new cart. They took it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were the drivers of the cart. Uzzah went by the side of the ark while Ahio went before it. And then we see in verse 6 and 7, when they came to Nachon's grain floor, Uzzah put his hand on the ark of God to keep it safe in its place. The oxen were out of control. And the wrath of the Lord burned against Uzzah, sent destruction on him because he had put his hands on the ark, and death came to him there by the ark of God. And so we see David did not let the ark of the Lord come back to him to the town of David, but had it turned away and put into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And the ark of the Lord was in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for only 3 months. But the Lord totally blessed Obed-Edom and all his family. And so what do we see in verse 16 and 17? When the ark of the Lord finally came into Jerusalem, here's Michal, Saul's daughter, looking out at the window and saw King David dancing and jumping before the Lord. And to her mind, it seemed foolish. And they took in the ark of the Lord and they put it in its place in David's tabernacle, which David had put up. And David made burnt offerings and peace offerings to the Lord. And then what do we find? David came back to give a blessing to his family, and Michal, Saul's daughter, came out to him and said, how full of glory was the king of Israel today, who let himself be seen uncovered by his servant girls, like a foolish person uncovering himself without shame. Well, the result of that was Michal, Saul's daughter, had no child till the day of her death. But wait, there is more I want to share with you. After the sin of Bathsheba, if you remember, Nathan the prophet came to David and said, what? You remember what he said? Trouble in River City. You're going to have a bloody household. Well, what do we see? Amnon rapes Absalom's sister. And so Absalom kills his brother. And then we find Joab, when Absalom wanted to kill his own dad, David. Okay, before that happened, Absalom goes on the run too. Absalom kills Amnon, and then Absalom runs out of the country because his mother was the daughter of the king of Geshur, if you remember. And so he goes over there and he waits, and he's there for several years. And then Joab, who is the captain of the host, loves David, and he knows David misses Absalom. So you're going to hear a story where where Joab goes over and gets Absalom and brings him back to see David. Okay, so Joab, the captain of the army, loves, even though Absalom killed Amnon, he goes out of his way and brings Absalom back after he's been gone for like 3 years. But Absalom never gets to see David. David never shows his face to Absalom for 2 years. 2 years. And Absalom keeps going to Joab, the captain of his army, saying, I want to see my dad. I want to see my dad. And Joab says, have patience. And so Absalom goes and burns his barley crop. So now Joab, his military leader, is really upset at Absalom, who he tried to help, who's now burnt his field. So now Absalom is trying to kill his dad. Remember, Absalom tries to overthrow David's kingdom. And what happens in the battle, Absalom has a head of hair like you would not believe. I don't know if you knew that. His hair was so long and so thick and so much. He's trying to get away, and his hair gets caught in a tree, and he's hanging between heaven and earth with his hair caught in tree branches. And so Joab comes up and kills Absalom. And David had commanded Joab, "You're not to kill my son," and he does it anyway. So now Joab kills Absalom. So now Joab's in big trouble. And David ends up telling Solomon on his deathbed, "You better go take care of that problem." But then what happens? This is why Adonijah thought he was going to be king next. I don't know if this guy had mental problems or physical problems, but nothing ever happened with this guy. But Adonijah thought he was going to be next. Who would have thought it'd be Solomon? Okay? So what happens? Solomon kills Adonijah. So David, talk about problems. All because he had 10 wives and he went after Bathsheba. I mean, like, what's your problem? Okay, so I just kind of want to give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about next week. So let's stand.